Hello and welcome back to another video. My name is CJ, the Populist New Yorker, and today we're going to be taking a look at the 2022 North Carolina Senate race. So this is going to be one of the contentious races of the midterms next year, and even though it's early, I figure we'd take a look at where the race is headed right now, who's running, and what will be the likely outcome of the general election result. So North Carolina has two Republican senators currently. If we fill in the map, this is the current U.S. Senate right now, 50-50 tie. Democratic vice president breaks the tie. But if this seat were to flip, let's say all else equal, a Democrat wins North Carolina, the Democrats would have an absolute majority in the Senate. Therefore, the sway of somebody like a Joe Manchin or Kyrsten Sinema would have a lot less of an impact. There would be a lot more that Democrats would be able to get done in that situation. If we look at the current primary and who's running on either side, for the Republicans, there's three declared candidates. Oh, let's go up. Three declared candidates. Pat McCrory, who is the former Republican governor of the state of North Carolina, also former mayor of Charlotte. Mark Walker, who is a member of the House from North Carolina's 6th District. And Ted Budd, who is also a U.S. representative from North Carolina. So far, just three declared candidates. Some other potentials are Dan Forrest, who is the former lieutenant governor, also ran against Roy Cooper this time around. But so far, the three declared candidates, two of them are House members, one of them is a former governor, a governor who lost re-election, might I add, in 2016 to Roy Cooper, the current governor. The polling on this primary indicates that Pat McCrory, out of the declared candidates, is dominating the field. He's leading by 20, in some cases, almost 30 points against Mark Walker, who's in second place for the primary. But a majority of the electorate is undecided. However, I think it's very unlikely that those undecided Republican primary voters end up going to one of the other candidates. They're probably going to break for McCrory. He's well known in the state. He was a governor. He's been mayor of Charlotte for, I think, a decade and a half. He's a very well-known Republican in the state. If we look at the hypothetical polling with Laura Trump added into the mix, she actually wins some of the earlier Republican polls by quite a bit. But the most recent poll with her in it has her and Pat McCrory tied, with, of course, a decent amount undecided because it is very early. It's only May of 2021. If we look at the Democratic primary, there's 5 declared candidates. There's a state senator, there's a scientist, and someone who ran for the House. The Democratic frontrunner is Cheri Beasley, who is a former Chief Justice of the North Carolina Supreme Court. Jeff Jackson is also in second place in this primary. He is a member of the House, I believe. No, he's a state senator. So basically, the primary is down to these two candidates, similar to the Republican primary. If Laura Trump is to run, it's going to be between her and Pat McCrory. But in this case, it seems like Cheri Beasley has a decent lead on the field. But again, some of the first poll conducted in March has a tied race with the vast majority undecided. But it seems as time goes on, more people are starting to back her. Again, Jeff Jackson could still win this primary, but right now it looks like Cheri Beasley is the favorite. Likewise, it looks like Pat McCrory is the favorite candidate for the Republicans. If we look at how North Carolina voted in the last election in 2020, they voted for Donald Trump by 1.3%. So this is a narrower margin from the nearly 4 points that the state went to Donald Trump in 2016. So the state shifted more Democratic. If we look at the Senate race that occurred in North Carolina as well, Tom Tillis ended up winning by nearly 2 points over his opponent, Cal Cunningham. So he outperformed former President Trump by a little bit, 0.2 or 3 or 4% or something like that. And again, there was a lot of third-party candidates. Cal Cunningham was kind of marred with scandal. But I think even despite that, I think Tom Tillis would have won. As I said, analyzing the race in the lead-up of the 2020 election, North Carolina polling always favors Democrats just about every time. So if a Democrat is leading by around 2 or 3 points in the aggregate, they're probably going to end up losing. In order for a Democrat to win in North Carolina, they need to be leading by 5-10 points even. Because polling is just that skewed for whatever reason. I don't really know why that is. I think it's because North Carolina has more registered Democrats than Republicans, but it has a high number of Democrats. I believe anywhere from 12 to 15% of registered Dems in North Carolina end up voting for the Republican nominee. So I think when they take registered voters in North Carolina, the reason it's skewed is because more registered Democrats than Republicans are more likely to vote for the candidate of the other party. And again, if we go to Pat McCrory's race, Pat McCrory won by a narrower margin than I thought. He only got 51.5% of the vote. He only beat Dan Forrest by around 4.5 points. So this was a lot closer than I would have thought it had been, considering that Roy Cooper was a fairly popular governor. But again, we analyzed the last Senate race. It's going to be close, either way it goes. Obviously, based on these results, it looks like Republicans are favored in North Carolina. A Democrat has not won a Senate race in North Carolina since 2008, since Kay Hagan versus Elizabeth Dole, and that was during a blue tsunami in 2008, backlash to the Iraq War, the recession, the Bush presidency as a whole. If we go to 2014, actually we'll do 2016 first. If we look at 2016, North Carolina went a little bit more decisively for the Republicans. They won it by 3.6%, presidentially speaking, which is a decent lean margin. If we go to the Senate, Republican candidates seem to always outperform other Republicans statewide. Richard Burr won by around 6 points against Deborah Ross. So again, Senate-wise, North Carolina tends to favor Republicans more than Democrats because, again, this was the same year that Roy Cooper won by 0.2% over Pat McCrory. And that's relevant, too, because Pat McCrory is the leading Republican nominee, yet he's lost his re-election bid for governor, albeit very narrowly. But again, he loses by 0.2%, while Richard Burr wins by nearly 6% and Donald Trump wins by 3.6%. So, it kind of shows you a bit the kind of candidate that Roy Cooper is. I don't really have any election results on the other Democratic candidates, so I can't really compare because none of them are statewide candidates. Obviously, if Roy Cooper was running for the Senate race, that would really shake things up, I think, because he's still a fairly popular governor, won re-election by around 4 points. But again, North Carolina is one of those states that doesn't really seem to swing very wildly. It is very much in the political center. If it votes for a Democrat, it's only by a little bit. And if it votes for a Republican, it's a little more, but it's not nearly as big of a margin as, 10 points as other comparable states, like Ohio or such, politically speaking. If we go back to 2014, this was an off-year election, similar to 2022 with a Democratic president, Barack Obama, in which Kay Hagan was defeated. She was the incumbent Democratic senator we talked about in 2008. She won a pretty large margin. 52-44 is a pretty decent margin in a state like North Carolina, which historically has been a Republican state. I would say North Carolina still is a Republican state, not ruby red by any means, but certainly a light red state. And she lost by under a point, 1.7%. Similar margin to Tom Tillis's 2020 victory. Something about the off-year climate, though, that in North Carolina is only really replicated in a state like Georgia, is that the election margins don't swing wildly in midterm years. 2018, Republicans won the House popular vote by a very small margin, but they, it was relatively non-lopsided. 2014 is the same way. North Carolina, the other races weren't much of blowouts. The same with Georgia. So, because North Carolina has a considerable old population of both Republicans and Democrats who tend to come out during these midterm years as well. So the red wave, blue wave is still a factor, but it's not a very big one in a state like North Carolina where a lot of older voters are coming out, both Democrats and Republicans, and voting the same way. So we can expect to see something similar like that in the 2022 Senate race. And again, looking at The polling rankings, they have it as either toss-up or lean Republican. I think it's fair to categorize the race as lean Republican. I think that based on the state's electoral history, Republicans are generally favored. Well, not lean. I would say it's probably more of a tilt Republican seat right now, just because of the state's history. Again, I don't know how strong the Democratic candidates are. I mean, we have a Chief Justice of the state Supreme Court. She might be somewhat well known, but a state senator, I don't really know about that. He would have to really do a good job of campaigning in the state. But again, it's so early on. A lot of these calls are not going to be, they might be accurate, but they're not set in stone because we still have a lot of time to kind of analyze what happens in this race. I think Republicans shouldn't be too concerned about losing this seat. I think it's more than likely. There's probably a 75% chance that they win North Carolina's Senate race come 2022. Again, it's going to be an off-year election. There's going to be more Republicans turning out most likely. But it might not be the stunning referendum against the Biden presidency that Republicans were hoping for, considering that Joe Biden is still relatively popular, much more popular than Trump was in his presidency. So it'll be hard to gauge. I don't think we're going to see a 2018 midterm in the reverse in 2022. I don't see that happening. I do think Republican turnout will be higher. I think that'll probably swing a few races. Probably like North Carolina, maybe Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. Obviously, Republicans need to hold on to these two seats. If they lose these two seats and North Carolina, that would be an electoral disaster for them. All else equal, obviously. But again, I think as of right now, North Carolina will be a Republican hold. I think even with a candidate like Pat McCrory, the turnout factor is still going to play enough of a role. And the Democratic challenger would have to prove to be pretty formidable. Roy Cooper was a well-known challenger to Pat McCrory. He'd been the Attorney General of North Carolina, I think for 3 terms. So he was a fairly well-known Democrat in the state. I think he'd been Attorney General since 2004, maybe 2008. But either way, he was a well-known statewide figure. The other Democrats aren't nearly as well-known, although I'm not from North Carolina. Maybe the Chief Justice is well known. I'm not quite sure. But I think ultimately this is probably going to be a Republican hold just for the time being. So that would basically leave the Senate map, all else equal, exactly the same. And again, Republicans winning in the state of North Carolina, it's probably not going to be by a tremendous margin, like a 5-point margin. I think it'll probably be more like a 2 or a 3-point margin. And again, it could be Pat McCrory or Laura Trump. I'm sure... Pat McCrory is a governor who lost re-election, but I also think Laura Trump has her own baggage, just being a Trump. But that may play to her advantage because Donald Trump did win the state of North Carolina. North Carolina still voted for Donald Trump, so it wouldn't be that outlandish to say that they'd vote for another Trump, but I definitely think Pat McCrory probably has slightly better electoral prospects than Laura Trump does in winning statewide in North Carolina. As for the Democrats, I think as of right now, probably Cherry Beasley has the best chance. Again, out of the declared, I don't really know a whole lot. They have Deborah Ross as a potential. Josh Stein might actually be somewhat of a decent candidate. He's the Attorney General of the state. He ran in 2016, close margin, and in 2020 won by a very close margin, but he still won nonetheless, and he is a well-known figure in the state. So I think either him, Deborah Ross is probably not the best candidate since she lost by a considerable amount, but probably Josh Stein actually wouldn't be a bad candidate for the Democrats to run. If I were the Democrats, I would probably put him forward in the primary, considering he probably has the best chance of winning the general. But anyway, guys, thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please leave a thumbs up if you did. Comment down below your thoughts. As always, thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.